Hey there folks, this is Bill Straub with Modern Thirst, and it's National Bourbon Day. So today I'm going to taste 3 bourbons blind out of my grab bag of bourbon samples. And then before we do that, I've got a non-bourbon I'm going to taste that was sent to us as a media sample. So just to let you know what the format's going to be, we received a media sample of Forager's Keep. That's the latest of the Diageo Orphan Barrel lineup. And so far, if you've followed Modern Thirst or a lot of other writers out there, I've not been the biggest fan of Orphan Barrel. And this one is by far the most unique of them so far. It is a Scotch. I believe it's a single malt Scotch whiskey. It is 48% ABV, so 96 proof, and it's 26 years old. So I'm going to give it a quick taste. I'm by no means a Scotch expert. If you really, really want to read about Scotch, check out Modern Thirst writer Wes Jolly. He's really our expert at this, but I know enough to be dangerous, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a taste and see what I think. After that, we're going to do a blind tasting of 3 bourbons. So let's see. As you can imagine, because it's a Scotch, it's really light in color, almost straw. Kind of wish that a 26-year-old whiskey would be a little bit darker, but you can't really always judge European whiskeys and Scotch and such by American standards, where ours get pretty dark pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and get this started. And you know, all things aside with the Orphan Barrel, one of the biggest gripes people have is not always about the whiskey itself. It's about the fanciful stories that they kind of make up. You know, no one lost whiskeys and didn't know they had them. They just didn't know what to do with them. They were just sitting in a warehouse. So we kind of get tired of the fake stories, I guess, is the biggest issue with them. This one's a pretty hefty price tag. I think this is north of $300, maybe even higher than that. Yeah, it's very grainy, a little bit of honey. A little bit of citrus in there. There's kind of some lemon. I really wasn't expecting that. Kind of a buttery lemon type of note. Yeah. Honestly, it kind of smells like a Pinot Grigio or a Chardonnay, or not really a Chardonnay. I guess that would be a little heavier, but maybe a Pinot Grigio with a little bit extra oomph behind it. So the first thing I notice is it has a pretty viscous mouthfeel at the front of the palate, but it drops off considerably as it reaches the back of the palate. The finish is really short on this, which I wasn't expecting from a 26-year-old whiskey. I like the proof though. At 96 proof, there's just enough heat there. Flavor-wise, not a whole lot of graininess on the palate. It's not particularly oatmeal or anything like that. There's a little bit of grassiness, but all in all, I get more of that kind of a lemony, sweet, a little bit of pine to it. Yeah, and there's a buttery note to it too. Again, that short finish is a little bit disappointing. But as far as single malt Scotch whiskeys go, it's a fine drink. It's a 26-year-old. So, you know, there's definitely a little bit of age on it. I like the fact that this is a 96 proof instead of some of the typical things you'll see these come out as around probably closer to, you know, 80 proof or 86 proof. I think this probably would have been a pretty watery and weak whiskey at 86 proof. At 96, it's really not that bad. Yeah, that's enjoyable. It's a good set. I don't know about the price. You're going to have to make that call for yourself based on your finances. But all in all, I'm not disappointed. I'm not going to urge anyone to rush out and buy it. I don't think it's the best thing ever, but it's solid. All right, so moving on. So what we do at Modern Thirst, or what I do, when I drink bottles and I like them, sometimes I'll review them and I'll score them, but I want to revisit them at some time and try them blind. It's really hard to do blind tastings on your own, or if my wife is around to set them up for me. So what I like to do is I always pour samples or parts of samples, parts of bottles into small bottles, and I throw them in a box, and I just number them. And then I keep a spreadsheet here on the computer where I track what each of those is. So I won't know what these are because I don't know what 7 is. The green labels on these always mean bourbon. I also have others for rye and other whiskeys as well. So the numbers that I pulled out kind of randomly here, well, very randomly, are 7, 19, and 44. And the only thing I know about these is that they're bourbon. So we'll taste them, and I'll reveal them after I give some tasting notes on it. So we'll start with B7. I'm going to go ahead and pour these and let them kind of sit for just a moment before I taste them. That's B19. B for bourbon, obviously. And this is 44. We'll go low to high, obviously, so we'll start with 7. Lemon citrus, candied citrus. This is, I mean, just based on the nose, I think I can tell where this comes from. It's almost certainly MGP. It just screams black pepper and kind of candied lemon zest. A little hint of bubblegum on there reminds me of some of the older Heaven Hill weeded stuff, but on the nose, I'd probably say MGP. Oh, that's pretty good. That's got some decent heat on it too. I really think that's MGP. I've got a number of different MGP bottles floating around in that sample box, so I couldn't begin to tell you which one it is. It's got a decent amount of age on it. I don't know. A lot of lemon zest, a lot of pepper. It's a little light on the palate. Overall, it's a very pleasing flavor. I think MGP makes a really good bourbon, a really good rye. And it's a very distinctive flavor compared to most of the Kentucky stuff. So sometimes it kind of jumps out of the glass. Sometimes it can be hard to tell, but I'm guessing that's what that is. I'm fairly confident in it. Move on to 14. It's interesting. There's a lot of oak on this. I don't think this is one of the double-barreled ones. It's not really dark enough, but it almost smells like that deep dark chocolate and coffee flavor you get on double-barreled whiskeys, with almost a hint of a rubber on the background of that. Maybe a kind of a. It's almost like being out in the summer on a newly paved or asphalted road. You get that smell of the asphalt in the summer, and that's what this kind of reminds me of. I don't mean that in a really bad way. I just get notes of that along with that powdered cocoa and coffee. That's interesting. Doesn't jump out of the glass as to what that could be. There is some nuttiness on it. At first I was thinking it was going to be a little Jim Beamish, but I didn't get that Jim Beam finish. Nuttiness tends to be Heaven Hill. There is a pepper spice on here that reminds me a little bit of wild turkey. It's definitely better in the glass and on the palate than it really is on the nose. The nose, I just think it's okay. There's a couple of weird notes going on there. This is really oaky. Very oak forward. There's a nuttiness to it. Not as high proof as that one, I don't think. But it's not an 80 or 90 proof one. I'd guess 95 to I don't think it's bottled in Mon because I think it's probably older than that, and I'm pretty sure it's not Henry McKenna. So I'm going to guess it's in the, I don't know, 9 to 10 year range, but it's not Henry McKenna. But it's good. I like the flavor. I don't love it, but I like it. We'll have to reveal it and see what it is. I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah, it's not bad. I definitely am favoring the first one so far. And third, this is B44. A lot more of that lemon citrus, which does seem to be MGP, but there's a bubblegum note on this that's really strong. Along with some oak. A little bit of nutmeg, kind of some baking spices thrown in there. And the more I smell it, the less I get of that lemon citrus, so I'm not entirely sure. Again, this is probably not MGP, I guess. I get some very light chocolate. And there's just loads of vanilla on this too. Hints of that citrus on there, but a lot of vanilla, a little bit of oak. And that bubblegum flavor or smell is pretty dominant here. Oh boy, that's pretty tasty bourbon. Reminds me a lot of the first one, to be honest. It's a little bit of a shorter finish, but overall there's a ton of citrus and vanilla on the palate. A lot of black pepper on the rear end of the palate. It's a shorter finish than the first one, but it's pretty pleasing. A lot of similarities in terms of overall flavors. It's a little thin on the mouth, which probably explains a little bit of the shorter finish. But all in all, I think it's probably my favorite of the three, and I would guess it might be another MGP sourced bourbon. And this one is pretty high proof. I would guess highest proof of the three so far, pretty easily. I put this at 115 to 120 plus. A lot of, the more I smell it, the more black pepper I get, and it's pretty nice. I thought about having water out here. I kind of decided against that at the last minute, but yeah, a lot of black pepper on that finish. The finish is a little longer than I gave it credit for at first. I would put it medium in length. Say medium to longish. I don't remember on this one. I probably said it, but shorter than the first one on this one. And these are similar to me. This one's very much an outlier. Again, it smells a little bit. Smells a lot oakier, and I would probably normally guess that this is the oldest of the three, but it's kind of hard to tell. Because I also think it's the lowest proof. If I were to guess, I would say that this one is probably... I'm going to try this again before I make another estimation on the age. Still has that slightly rubberish, almost a chemical asphalt smell to it. Man, it's the oakiest of the three. Now, what could kind of throw this off is that I've always felt that MGP products, they don't taste particularly oaky even when they're old. I don't know if that's because they're often aged in Indiana, and maybe that's a little, I mean, it's right across the river, but maybe it's a slightly milder climate than Kentucky. But I feel like that they're typically not overly oaky even when they get up there in age. Whereas a lot of the Kentucky stuff, once it hits, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, it's time to pull it out of the barrel. It's really done. Heaven Hill is a perfect example of that. Heaven Hill gets oak flavors and very oak forward at the start instantly. And Jim Beam's the same way. If Jim Beam goes out longer than about 10 to 12 years, it's really hit and miss as to whether or not that's going to be a good bourbon. MGP stuff I feel like tends to be able to go out 12, 13, 14 years, even though you can't find those anymore. And they're still excellent. If I were going to rank these, I would go 1, 2, 3. So I think at this point, the best way to go is to just reveal what it is. So I'm going to check on my computer over here, pull up the spreadsheet. So the first one is 7 in bourbon. Number 7 is a Smooth Ambler Old Scout bourbon. It's a private select from the Louisville Bourbon Society, or the Bourbon Society. So it is an MGP sourced. 8 years old, 106.8 proof. I thought it was much higher than that. And this is barrel number 1027. Really nice whiskey. I really like it. It was number 2 for me on this tasting. Yeah, so I got the MGP part right. So on, what's this one? 19. We'll check that one out. 19 is Ezra Brooks Old Ezra. That's a 7-year, 101 proof Kentucky bourbon. That's, the oak part was right. They do source most of their stuff from Heaven Hill, so it's almost certainly a Heaven Hill bourbon. 7-year-old, 101 proof. Oak forward makes sense. Nuttiness makes sense. That does make sense to me now. I like it. It doesn't compare to the other two. It's definitely a third place, and honestly, it's probably a slightly distant third, even though I like Old Ezra 101, the 7 proof, and I drink it whenever I have bottles around. It definitely kind of pales next to the other two. And this one is 44. Of course, Bell Mead Cast Strength Private Selection Bourbon. So another MGP. This one is either 12 or 13 years old. It's 120.5 proof, so it's up there. It's on the high end of what I thought it would be. I'm a little surprised at that. But that is Indiana, obviously, from MGP. It's barrel number 4148 and bottle number 69. I guess they didn't put a bottle number on the Old Scout. That Old Scout I probably would have got 3 or 4 years ago from the Bourbon Society. I haven't been an active member in a while. But there you go. So that's our blind tasting for National Bourbon Day. I hope you enjoyed it. It's fun for me. I always love tasting bourbon, and I love tasting it blind. It's the perfect way to have kind of an impartial tasting notes and impartial review of bourbon. Obviously, I'm not going to score these today. It was kind of fun. Seat of my pants. If you're going to score bourbon, I always think you need to have a lot more than a little sip of this, and it always helps to have it over 2 or 3 days if you can, because you never know how your palate can be affected by what you had for lunch, or whether or not you have a cold or your allergies are heating up. It's just kind of hard to say on a single sit down. But by and large, 3 good bourbons. The MGP stuff really shined today, and the Forager's Keep from Orphan Barrel. If you want my recommendation, if this is north of $300, it's kind of hard to say go buy it. If you're a Scotch guy, as you know, 26-year-old whiskeys can get pretty darn expensive. So this might not be totally out of line with the market. I have a feeling that it's slightly higher. In Kentucky, I feel like our Scotch prices are a little bit inflated anyway, because they kind of want to encourage you to buy local and buy Kentucky bourbon. But I would say there's probably better ways to spend your money, even on Scotch, for better whiskeys than this one. But with that said, it's not a bad whiskey. It's decent. It just doesn't jump out at me. And if I'm going to lay down that kind of cash, I want something that really kind of blows my mind. But anyway, happy National Bourbon Day to everybody. I hope you like this. If you do, please subscribe and like on YouTube. And if you think about it and you have an extra $1 or so a month to spend, please think about supporting us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/ModernThirst. We really appreciate it. And hope you guys have a great day. Cheers.